Now I'd like to introduce today's guest. Nigel Smith is a designer, art director, and photographer by education, and a businessman with 17 years of leadership experience. He's worked in London, Milan, and Toronto. He has an extensive work background with diverse international clients, including a variety of commercial and cultural sectors. He's taught both at Harvard and the University of Toronto. He lectures regularly on design and branding. He wrote a column on branding for the National Post, a major paper in Canada. His work has been acclaimed and recognized internationally by Taschen Books, the American Institute of Graphic Arts, a Presidential Design Award, and the Art Directors Club and Advertising and Design Club of Canada. Nigel Smith is perhaps as clear an embodiment of the intersection between design and all of the other sectors that we've been talking about as we're going to have in this class. I realize I say that about almost every guest, but that's just how it's shaking out. So please join me in welcoming Nigel Smith.
Thanks, George. Thank you very much. Sure. Is that mic working? Everyone hear me all right? A little rusty here, so let's just plow into it. My partnership is certainly both of us, Helen Kerr and myself, our educational background is very rooted in design and the idea of the aesthetic and embrace or a struggle with the definition of beauty or making things. And so this particular image is, one of the a catalyst or an inspiration for a project that my wife designed that is a lamp. So this is a pine cone that when it warms up or a fire heats the forest and the pine cone opens up, the seeds fall out. And this is a lamp based on the idea that the same principle. So when the lights warm up the wood, it pops open. And on my desk, a little while ago, we were doing a signage project, and these were a couple of little erasers, souvenirs, that I had that I stacked on my desk, and that actually, in a sort of, is that cheating? That became the basis for a signage system that we did for some great architect friends of ours who were renovating a couple of apartment buildings in Midtown Toronto, and those two erasers became a signage system outside these buildings. But in a way, those two previous examples are a little misleading about what I'm going to try and do when George asked me to come down and talk today about understanding design. What I have to do now is do 20 years in 20 minutes. So I'm going to talk about the evolution of our practice and how it really has changed. As George mentioned, my original background was in graphic design, and that practice evolved into a kind of communication design from graphic design, and then we started doing more commercial work, and then there was a branding phase, and then the branding becomes strategy, and then strategy becomes a kind of integration of design. And then our most recent iteration is something called Foresight, which I'll talk very briefly about at the end of this very rapid-fire 20 minutes on the background and some of our approaches to some design projects over the last, as I say, about 20 years. So when I first started getting into the practice, we designed books, and I know books are made out of paper and they're rectilinear, and they have covers on them, and they used to be used all over the place, and now, of course, the world has changed significantly, and the world of book design has, even though there are extraordinary book designs out there, the actual market for it as a viable business has changed so much so that we don't do books anymore. This was one that we did for the Museum of Modern Art, Chuck Close, the artist, and it was a really exciting way to kind of expand what I love doing in graphic design, which was getting into the content and understanding what you were trying to communicate and working with form and materials and imagery. From books, we started doing exhibitions. This was at the Whitney Museum of Art, and this was the entire museum doing the exhibition graphics, the panels, the wrappings, the murals on the wall, working with curators to do the signage, the wayfinding, the identifying of the main areas throughout the museum. This was exhibition graphics for a temporary pop-up museum in Toronto called the Children's Own Museum. And again, here we were doing graphics that wrapped on walls, wrapped around boxes. You can see in the lower right there. The signage system came out of that, where we were designing icons that helped the kids and their parents around the museum. So we went from books to graphics, then we started getting into fundraising work, and this was for an event for the Writers' Trust of Canada, where we're again very much immersed in the world of graphic design and form and using letters to make beautiful things that were also supposed to be communicating other things about raising money and getting people interested in giving money to this event at the Writers' Trust. We started doing visual identities, the idea of logos and symbols for companies. KPMB is a very accomplished and great architecture firm in Toronto, and we worked on developing with them this little acronym mark and customizing the letters. And then we worked with them to do their very first website, their promotional materials, their stationery, and a whole range of graphic design applications. So this is very much my sort of early career in graphic design, which led to doing annual reports. This is for the Metcalf Foundation, where we did a series of annual reports. And again, the discourse is getting beyond what it looks like, but what you're trying to say, who you're talking to, but still very much a kind of a sort of simple engagement with the client in terms of problem solving. You're still very much in this, I'm still very much in this part of my career doing graphic design. It has an aesthetic appeal. There is some sort of research going into the work, but it really is founded in the language of traditional graphic design: typography, color, image, shape, materials. The practice evolved, and we started doing promotional work. This is for the School of Continuing Studies that's aligned with the University of Toronto. And here we are starting to art direct photography, coming up with the tagline, learn more, inspire more. And here we're starting the problem solving is people didn't know what the teachers at the School of Continuing Studies did. And so we started to put in larger biographies and just in a more didactic way in the print material help the school communicate why their teachers were credible or had an attraction and why people should go to the School of Continuing Studies there. So it became, we're taking it beyond just graphics into a kind of a communication design, building an image library by art directing, a distinct style of photographs for the School of Continuing Studies. Another project was for Frank Restaurant, which is part of the Art Museum in Toronto. And again, we did a mark. This typography is inspired by Ed Ruscha with a little rectilinear masking tape R on the corners, and expanded that into a full sort of schema of everything from aprons to coasters to what the website should look like to bags and napkin holders and things. One of the ideas that we introduced here was that it wouldn't just be Frank Gehry who had renovated the museum, but there was Frank Capra or Frank Sinatra or other Frankenstein, so that there were quotations that we sprinkled throughout things that made the whole Frank thing have a kind of a playful idea. As another project was for, this is for the School of Nursing at the University of Toronto, where we are using that same vocabulary of word and image and coming up with slogans or taglines, very much in the marketing world. Come to the School of Nursing because we're the first, we're the best, and combining that with an image library and rolling that out across websites, posters, postcards. So very much the idea of graphic design becoming communication design. So just to sort of pause here and try and contextualize the conversation this morning, because George asked me to talk about understanding design, and I'm taking this opportunity to kind of do this evolution of my own practice, and we had a pretty interesting chat just before I came on, and we talked about how much the world has changed and how fast it's coming, and the whole idea that design is now part of a much larger discourse of problem solving. And the reason I have these two large words up on the screen is that we've really realized that there's this exercise that now becomes part of our approach, which is this idea of from and to, where we have to go from and where we're going to. And what often happens in the world of design is that somebody, the client, might be coming to us and very often with a specific solution. Could you design this website? Could you design this lamp? And it is for a kind of undefined large group, a broad audience. Everybody will love this lamp. Or my poor wife, Helen, has to put up with this, a couple of times a year. Somebody has designed the new, pet picker-upper, the poop scoop. So there's always this, somebody is already kind of in their mind's eye got an idea of what it is we want to design, and it's for everybody. And so why this slide is up is what you're trying to do, I think, now, or what we're trying to do, is to change that discourse from a very specific solution for a very wide audience to sort of put the brakes on and say, no, actually, right now, let's just park that, and let's say we don't know exactly what the solution is. Let's just hold on to that. There's no specific solution yet, and let's talk about who it's for in a much more specific way. So from a specific solution to the idea of no solution yet, and from a wide audience to a very specific and focused and targeted group of people. The other froms and tos are the idea that you want to take it from an industry focus or from your own, and as a designer, you might be struggling with this, but from your own creative impulses and what you want to do with the work to what the user wants out of the product or service. So that idea of from an industry focus to a user focus. The other from to that you'll see, I hope I'm going to explain and show, is the idea you're taking it from a single item or object into a system of things. Not just one thing you need to design, but a more complex system of things that will solve your problem in a bigger way. And then the larger, more investigative, and I think perhaps the most challenging from and to, is taking an issue from a client, and when they're just looking at the symptoms of something and trying to take it to the actual root causes of something. So that requires a kind of a broader investigation into, really looking into something to see, are we really solving this little problem, or are we going to dig deeper and do a deep dive and find out what the real root cause or root problem is that we're trying to solve. So with this, if there's a beginning of this from to in my own practice, the art gallery in the Art Museum in Toronto had a major renovation several years ago with Frank Gehry as the architect, and it was a complex story because they were given money by a local philanthropist. They had all sorts of thoughts about how to reinvent the museum. There was a whole kind of renaissance in the city about how the city was changing. So they came to us and wanted a logo. What we actually realized the larger problem was a communication problem, and they needed to talk about the fact that there was a new gift of art, there was a new building being built, there was all sorts of new ideas about displaying the art in the collection, and how this was part of a new future of the city. So the problem that we think we solved beyond just, give us a logo and something that looks nice, was actually a language or a communication structure. So you had new art, new building, new ideas, and new future. So we sort of took the problem apart a little bit and sort of presented it back to them and sort of solved it in a different way than I think they were expecting. Of course, the language and the vocabulary is graphic design, so we were doing banners and books and brochures. Another client, this is in the financial services industry, They came to us. We did an annual report for them. That relationship changed from just a project-based into the system of what their communications would be, from PowerPoint to their signage system to the wayfinding to the stationery to a massive, quite massive rollout of all sorts of financial reports. So there had to be typographic systems so they could report to all their clients about how various financial portfolios were doing. And then the largest part of the system, of course, was their website. And that became a pretty investigative project into who used it, how it was being used, what things needed to be communicated. And really, when we got to know Gluskin Sheff, this firm, what their larger challenge was to represent themselves as not a transactional brand, which was just about how do we quickly make money and move money around, but the larger discourse was how do we make this about a relationship, and what are the things that are above and beyond that kind of idea of transaction that makes Gluskin Sheff valuable because they have a relationship with their clients. Of course, the website is where you've got to talk and explain that through in its most intimate detail, and so it's a very, very in-depth project. Winners was a sort of a branding project where it's like an off-price brand offering, I think like Filene's Basement or Marshall's. And this was their original, what they had originally. And what was interesting about this project was that we started another phase of what we're doing a lot of now, but this was one of the first instances, was the idea of engagement. So we actually tried to, the first crack we took at this redesigning Winners didn't work out at all, and all sorts of senior management were not happy with it. And we realized that we had been given a design brief through the marketing department, but hadn't actually had a discourse or discussion with leadership and staff at Winners. So we actually made a survey, passed it around, and began a discussion about visual identity, brand, representation, symbols in this kind of marketplace. And this was, I think, very key to having a kind of successful implementation, because we had always began a discourse. We didn't just sort of, had we done the first rendition, just said, here's the design, but we actually began a relationship with management. The insight that came to us was that what Winners was trying to do was actually be an aspirational brand, and it's all about searching for something as beautiful and valuable as a Chanel or Prada fashion object. And so that, with the direct inspiration for this kind of very restrained black and white sort of fashion graphic design solution, even though in their own words they say Winners is a cheesy name with this quite elegant black and white, refined and sophisticated look. So there's a kind of interesting contrast between the name and the look. And that's the before and after. RGA is, again, a big corporate client of ours, where a reinsurance company in St. Louis. And again, we did this survey where we actually engaged with leadership to start to become much more of a kind of much more of a problem-solving exercise rather than a kind of predetermined, oh, this is what we're going to do. It became much more of a dialogue with them. We looked around at what all the other major reinsurance companies were doing and presented that and had a discourse around differentiation. How can you make the RGA brand stand out and be different? Branding is often about, often talked about if you're going to boil it down, is what is your difference in the marketplace, and how does your brand represent that? And then this particular slide I'm showing because I think this was a real misstep on our behalf, that we after we did the survey and engaged with them, we did a number of iterations, and frankly just too many. I think we kind of overwhelmed them and looked unsure and couldn't really justify what we were doing. And so I'm a big fan of iterative design, but I think it's very important to be editing. So here, when we did this kind of significant exploration into the RGA logo, I think we did too many, and we really did sort of not set the ground for success. And as a result, they were, I think, kind of hesitant as to what to do next. Further investigation and sort of explorations really said that the real insight that we needed to talk about and to demonstrate was difference. And the easiest way to differentiate RGA was to make them the only red player in very much a kind of a sea of blues and greens. So it was a very, very simple solution. The typography, of course, is sort of cleaned up and a little bit bolder and a little more simpler and takes it out of a kind of a 70s, 80s aesthetic. But I think the real insight was the idea that it would have just a color differentiation. It's a very, very simple idea, but nonetheless something that needed to have a kind of an engagement with leadership to take them from their traditional blues and dark greens and blacks into something with all the kind of symbolism that something like a red, and particularly in financial markets, can kind of lead to great fear of the use of red. Waterfront Toronto is a very large undertaking where they're redeveloping all of the waterfront in Toronto, and we sort of inherited this as the before. This was the first iteration of the kind of representation of the brand across print and digital and different channels. And our work here was to, again, work with them, get a better understanding of what they wanted to do, and introduce just bolder color, more images, and much more language that talked about revitalization, and again, this idea of engaging with their stakeholders so that we could take it out of a kind of a dry corporate into kind of much more of a kind of a community discussion. Above and Beyond was another failed project where we were engaged by a very, very prestigious private school, prep school in Toronto, and they needed to do a fundraising campaign, and we went at it, really put our heads down and decided that this was the solution for them, and really it was. We should have thought a little bit more about it. There was a kind of elitist and we're above everybody else message that we were sending out, and so we, after we had sort of blown that out across a whole series of T-shirts and bookmarks and web and souvenirs, we had to go back and revisit that. We came back with these series of images that talked about how the young boys would develop into kind of more mature men. That didn't, for some reason, that didn't hook. They thought the colors at the bottom of the images weren't working. The next idea, again, this idea of iterative design, was to talk about the technical innovations that the kids at the school were learning on laptops, and so we thought this whole imagery around kind of digital thinking and representing technology with this delicate kind of clouds of color and arrows and shapes would be representative of this technologically innovative curriculum at the school. But that too was not on the mark, and the more we talked and the more we thrashed it out with leadership at the school, what actually was kind of core to their beliefs and what they really wanted to build their brand on was actually a much more traditional embracing of their core color, the kinds of kids that go to the school. This image shows the way that we approach brands. You have the Think Ahead logo that becomes the kind of core of the visual identity, and then you have to blow it out over the print and digital and image. And this was an ad campaign that we did for them. Think here, think there, think big. And again, a whole range of things as part of their brand representation. And a good salesman doesn't actually stop when he hears, yes, that's it. A good salesman only stops when he hears, no, we don't like that. So we kept going, and we did another series of ads that I thought were pretty good around think possibilities, think creativity, think potential, think inspiration. But they actually said, no, that's, you had it. You had it 2 weeks ago, stop and back it up. So the next sort of phase of our practice is the idea of integration. When I became a partner with my wife's industrial design firm, they had a couple of clients that were doing product design. And here you can see for a client called QuiziPro, where Helen designed sets of mixing bowls. They did potato peelers. They did many, many, many kitchen products. This is a cheese grater. This was a whole series of other kitchen tools. So Helen had already established the relationship with QuiziPro. Spatulas and quite a lovely dish rack, and a system of tools, a rack for holding tools and whisks and cheese graters, a coffee line of coffee tools. So Helen had already been doing the product, and then we worked with QuiziPro to rebrand them and do the visual identity, some advertising campaigns. We've art-directed the photography. So at this point, our practice is really quite wide in that we're working with our clients not only on the product that they're producing, but how they're going to promote it, how they're going to talk about themselves. So you have this very, very wide range of the relationship with a client through even designing their trade show booth and the promotions around that, and of course this whole system, which is something that I talked about a few minutes ago, from going from the object to the system. So here we have a system of designs where you're doing across the brand, where you're doing promotions and hang tags and stationery and boxes and promotional, and then in the corner there a small display item. So here we have the practice is now doing a very, very wide variety of projects, and the relationship with the client is based not on one particular project, but on the larger on the full range of their kind of business. This is something we had repeated with Gourmet Settings, a flatware company. Again, the relationship started because Helen was doing the product design, and these rather extraordinary things are actually styrofoam little model prototypes that are handmade of all the implements that would later be cast in metal. But this is the process where it's very, very hands-on and extremely delicate and refined work, where you're actually carving the items out of styrofoam, and then those actually become wooden models, and then eventually cast in stainless steel. And there are many, many, many different sets and extensions of flatware. And then, again, that idea of integration, well, my side of the business came in and started working with Gourmet Settings to do many, many different packages. They were tailored for different retailers, from Costco to Walmart to Target, where we were bringing our history of a kind of a love of modern and simple classical design that had its groundings in book and exhibition graphics, and started applying that in the very commercial kind of rock'em sock'em world of retail in the aisles of Target and Walmart. And this is there were 65 pieces and 48 pieces. The constant need for novelty in the world of housewares is quite extraordinary. And we did print promotions, and then the discourse expands beyond just the system of what's the brand and what's the product, but how does it actually work in terms of shipping? And so you start to get into the logistics of how does this thing display in Costco? What are the measurements? How does it come off the pallet? How many pallets get into a container? How much does the container weigh as it's coming over from China? So what begins as a very simple dialogue, in its infancy with the client about can you design a knife or a fork, ends up in a very complex discussion of how does the business work at a much, much larger scale. The University of Western Ontario is a fairly recent project where it's a university just outside Toronto that had the problem of representing itself this way. It had an extraordinarily diverse set of symbols and logos and typography with complete lack of cohesion or alignment in terms of what the institution, how it was representing itself to the larger world. Plus, the challenge of their ambitions with the university was to take it onto a national or even an international scale. And to be perfectly honest, nobody really knows where Ontario is except if you're in Canada. So there was a distinct decision to drop the Ontario part and go with the just the more simple Western university. But you can't just sort of launch into those kind of ambitious plans with a university without deep engagement. So what we were really, the heavy lifting of this project was not the actual graphic design or the brand thinking. The real heavy lifting was engaging with these so many diverse stakeholders. So there were intercepts on the campus, there were many workshops, there were interviews with donors, interviews with faculty, interviews with alumni, current students. The whole kind of culture of engagement was essential to kind of building the foundation for success. This was the solution that we came up with, a much more traditional crest that used the traditional symbols of academia to say without a doubt that it's a university, a long way away from the tower, which actually had sort of repercussions of or thoughts or spoke to the idea of ivory tower. And then this diagram shows that you start off with a brand identity toolkit. Well, there's your symbol and logo and what the language is, and then you have to apply it across a wide variety of applications. So beyond just the simple logo was the system for all the different faculties, and then of course what the banners look like, what the vehicles might look like, what souvenirs might look like, stationery, and on and on and on. But what they really, I think, appreciated around this project was the fact that we were bringing alignment. So 6 slides previously, you had, I think as many as 75 different logos and symbols, and this project and the fact that we really did pretty deep penetration and talked to so many people in terms of what the concerns were allowed a real cohesion around this new crest, word mark, and purple, the traditional purple color. We used the same color, but a much more cohesive solution. And this is not to say that we don't still get involved in the details. One of the things that they really appreciated was the fact that we actually designed them their own specific typeface, so that sprinkling throughout the visual identity was in its own typeface. So these are just some of the sketches where we took a couple of very elegant traditional serif typefaces and combined them and created their own custom face for Western. And then I saw that Yale had what are called old-style numbers, and I thought, oh, well, if Yale can have old-style numbers, we should do old-style numbers too. And here's the sketch of those kind of numbers that go above and below the baseline of the font. So this was a project very much about engagement and cohesion and alignment. Recently, we've also expanded that, and this is an affiliated college with Western, where we've, again, worked with them across a wide variety of promotional materials, their view books and banners. And they wanted also, and you can see the purple here, they wanted to be aligned much more with Western. And the website is very much a pretty deep dive into the way the brand works and using the analytics and metrics. So that's another part of what we're doing now, is working with a web programming company to really understand how users use a website and the site architecture of where most people come, what they're expecting, how they interpret your main navigation. So that's something that we're doing quite a bit of as well. Another project, if I was going to say in the evolution of where our firm is, this project on innovation. A furniture company came to Helen and asked her to design a chair for use at home in the healthcare sector, so that to have home care. But Helen's research really determined that there was not as good as idea that was in its first presentation, that there was really a much larger market available to do not chairs for in-home use, but actually institutional hospital line of furniture. And this is sort of the process of building this line of furniture, with modeling the way different people seat. Again, if you remember a few slides back, those little foam models of the flatware and the knives and forks, well, here's a full-size styrofoam model, hand sculpted of a preliminary prototype of the chair, models in wood. The component parts start to come together for this healthcare chair, a small wooden model. And one of the innovations that Helen brought to this was by examining the real needs of what healthcare needs. One of the largest concerns of hospitals and healthcare when they buy furniture is its need to be clean, that you need to be able to, because of infection control, that causes so much more trouble than the actual, when you're admitted to a hospital, the chances are it's not the thing that you're admitted for that you're going to have problems with, it's in some infection-related disease. So one of the things that came out of the work for QuiziPro with the silicone whisks and spatulas is that nothing sticks to silicone. And so this particular hospital furniture, and this is the back of the chair, uses a silicone covering that can be easily wiped down. And this is how the silicone was designed to fit into clip into the back of the chair. So the silicone is a very, very important innovative use of materials to help with infection control. This is the row seating for waiting areas. It's also, I think, being sold in airports. And here's the whole range, the system of chairs, from offices to stools to chemotherapy treatment chairs. Is the sort of funny one in the middle row, office chairs, and then the one in the upper right there is the bariatric chair because of the problems of obesity in hospitals. So now there a lot of hospitals need these extra wide and extra strong chairs. Then the sort of branding aspect and promotional marketing, so we worked and did little slideshows and promotional materials for this chair called Citrus to take the project into a kind of a full integration of design, not just from product and system, but to brand and marketing. And then the latest thing that we're doing now is the project has evolved into what we're doing is called Foresight. And Al Gore has come out with a book recently, and he talks about the drivers of global change. So I thought that was a kind of interesting way to as a quick intro to where we are. So these are things that I'm sure we're all very aware of, the idea of globalization and digital communications and geopolitical power shifts and economic recovery and the new economy, technological and scientific change and environmental disconnect. Those are, very with us. The rate at which they're changing, maybe no one really expected. But it's really, really changing the way business is operating and what we have to be as problem solvers. So our latest offering as a studio is something called Foresight. And Foresight is not predictions, it's not a forecast, but what it does is it paints plausible future scenarios, and it's based on a formal methodology. And what you're doing is you're determining probable implications that can help you guide your strategy or make policies, manage risk, or potentially give you the basis to create innovative solutions by looking not backwards, but at the signals out there to help you see what may and is plausibly coming in the future. So what it also does is it helps you understand in great depth the landscape around you, and it also, going back to some of the work I talked about earlier with engagement, is the fact that you're really getting to know stakeholders, getting to know the leadership and management within your firm to engage on a much broader and deeper way to build the foundation for problem solving and for success. So there's 7 steps in Foresight. The first one is you would analyze the existing documents, so chances are the client has all sorts of data or reports or interviews. You then have to kind of take a step back and frame the question. What really is it that we're trying to solve here? And then you go into the phase called a horizon scan, which is the idea that you're looking out there in a distant way at the things on the horizon, and you're collecting weak signals. Not the obvious things, but perhaps the marginal things that start to, if you're seeing clusters of them or more and more of things that are considered weak signals, those can become indicative of a larger change. A STEEPV workshop is the framework for that horizon scan. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the whole engagement. You're interviewing and engaging and discussing and workshopping with the client in terms of what they think of and what their reactions are to some of your weak signal gathering. So you've got the signals. Once you've clustered those, that becomes you've determined what the drivers of change are based on the specific sector that you're in. You develop scenarios for what the future might plausibly be, and then you're determining what some of the implications of what those scenarios are. And then from there, this is giving you the basis for developing a strategy or opportunity to innovate. So what is horizon scanning? This is the idea from the chief scientist in the United Advisors Committee in the United Kingdom. Horizon scanning is the systematic examination of potential threats, opportunities, and likely developments, including but not restricted to those at the margins of current thinking and planning. So the margins, I think, is a very, very important idea here. Horizon scanning may explore novel and unexpected issues as well as persistent problems or trends. But essentially, it's exploring uncertainties to prepare us to analyze the certainties. I think a metaphor around this is the idea of when an earthquake's coming, those distant signals are can be very, very faint, but obviously when they start to approach, the waves of change become bigger and bigger. And so horizon scanning is a way of starting to say, can we determine those very, very faint signals to see what are the larger waves of change coming. A STEEPV framework is a really fascinating thing that I've kind of latched onto to understand what a horizon scan is. STEEPV being an acronym for social, technology, economic, environmental, politics, and values. And the idea here is that you're forced to look across a wide variety of areas where you otherwise would not look. You just sort of stay in finance or you stay in ecology. So it gives you this framework to look across a wide variety. So what are weak signals? Well, you're going from doctoral theses to very fringe papers. And so you start to create, by looking across this wide variety, you start to create you're looking at weak signals to gather patterns that are determining, is that just a marginal strange thing, or is there enough clustering around that to actually say that is something that's larger that we have to look at in more detail. So the signals, you start looking for the signals, and from the signals you develop trends. And as I said, there's a lot of workshopping with the client to make it an engaged process, not just a kind of, this is what we see. What we see, and how do you think about that? And what you find at these workshops is that a great number of the leadership and management say, yes, I had a hunch about that, or I read that, and this gives us the opportunity, a forum to them to start to share these sorts of these ideas. So just 2 quick trends. One of the things that you can see coming, or we've seen coming, is this idea of disintermediation, the end of the gatekeeper. So here this model shows the sort of more traditional idea where the silhouette in blue is actually sort of the gatekeeper of information, the client or the person trying to get that information needs to go through the gatekeeper to get, and we all do this when we Google, the Mayo Clinic. We're breaking down that line then of the gatekeeper. So here you have a situation where instead of the gatekeeper having sole access to the information, all of a sudden that information is shared and there's a discussion around what the information is. The information starts to become in the middle, and you can see how the advisor or the consultant is sort of moving slowly away from the client. And the last step in disintermediation is the idea that who was once a trusted advisor actually becomes peripheral to some of the decision making. And then finally, a disconnect. The second trend is the idea of reputation as currency. What was once a kind of one-to-one relationship in terms of a direct discussion is now changing in that people ask about the person's reputation, so now that it's not a one-to-one relationship, and of course that is now fueled by social media, which again starts to break apart the relationship, and all of a sudden you've got a very different relationship in terms of a person's relationship with a client or a service provider, because there is so much information available so quickly. So we were talking to a financial firm about how this sort of would be affecting their business model, because the amounts of money being exchanged are so enormous that the old model is there's no way somebody's going to make that kind of transaction without a very personal connection. It's face-to-face meetings, a real caretaker mentality. I need you to help me with that decision. But the truth of it is that the way relationships and disintermediation have changed, a sense of, self-confidence and empowerment, that the advisory role of bankers has changed so much so that even quite massive amounts of money are moving around without, not through the traditional relationship of banks or financial advisors, because of people's ability to kind of break down those relationships and get past the traditional gatekeepers. So again, where does horizon scanning and foresight take you? The idea is that you can, with this look into the future, you can start to develop steps, strategies, and policies, or identify opportunities to innovate around what a horizon scan or a future scan will tell you. So that was the 20 years in 20 minutes. Thanks so much.
The evolution of your career, as we were talking about before, is really the way the world is evolving in so many high value-added kinds of relationships, where you're moving from doing one thing to being able to think more broadly about the client's
absolutely. If you look back 10 years and thought that we would do this kind of research and this kind of engagement at a strategic level, or with our latest sort of iteration of Horizon, I had no idea that the world would have changed so much, and our approach to any sort of design or problem solving would have changed so much so fast.
One thing we didn't talk about beforehand, and I'm glad, because it's always better to have these conversations fresh, is that you and I were both trained as designers, and most of the students in this audience are not being trained explicitly as designers. So 2 questions. One, what do you wish that you had, given what you know now about the trajectory of your career and the kinds of issues you deal with, what do you wish you had studied when you were in school? Let's start with that one.
Well, I think the one that as much as I think we're savvy and aware, I think the big gap is, it's so extraordinarily fast, is technology. I mean, I think that is, it's just remarkable how, and slightly disconcerting how fast and how quickly that has changed, and your need to be on top of that. but I don't want to sort of throw all my cards into that, pile. I think that, that the broad education and the need for, to slow it down and have critical thinking and to really take a step back. And I don't know if you can learn this, but, I'm always amazed, Helen, my partner, how much she reads on how many things. Mm-hmm. Because, I don't know if this is what you want to hear, but the pressure to be kind of an extraordinary generalist and know so much about so many things is it's a big challenge.
Well,
to know about cultural things or linguistic things or travel things or business things or financial things or engineering things. I mean, the nature of our business is any client from any sector could walk in. So right. It's not a great answer, but right. You do need to know a lot.
Right.
And you have to be curious, and you have to read, and you have to that basis of critical thinking, so you can sort of see, is that a pattern, or is that something that's, where's that going?
Right. Well, it's so interesting because for all of these folks, many of whom have come out of a high school system that, in this country anyway, is obsessed with testing about those things that are sort of quantifiable and for which there's a clear and distinct correct answer.
Right.
Not that one doesn't need to know those things.
Well, can I say
Please.
that knowledge is, like, the actual fact thing is not that important because of Google. You can find anything so instantly. What the key thing to learn now is the pattern making and what those series of facts can tell you on a larger story. So what does, fact A and fact B, how can you connect those dots to make a larger cohesive story and to understand, is it meaningful? Do I dismiss that? What am I trying to say? That knowledge it's really sort of upended, right? So then just by knowing things, simple facts is just not enough.
Well, this is perhaps one of the real values, in my view, of a design education, is that you are faced with a series of complicated problems for which there is never, ever a single right answer. I mean, in other words, it's almost never the case that there's only one way to do the chair for the cancer patient.
Absolutely.
That's just not going to be the case.
No. Like I showed you those iterations of 9 logos. I don't know. They're all one's as good as the other, right?
Right.
I'm not trying to dismiss my own work, but it really, I think that's what you're speaking to. It is not a mathematical 2 + 2.
Well, and so I guess what we're saying is, in a way, part of what I hope this course is doing, and what one's college education needs to do, is to sort of help you to make the transition from the world of giving back facts. You know what I mean? Here are the 3 causes of the Revolutionary War. Now you tell me what the 3 causes of the Revolutionary War are, and we'll have an A, and everybody will be happy.
Right.
The truth is, that's not the question that you're going to get asked in the contemporary fast-changing world. It is going to be a strategic question about how likely are future wars?
Right.
What happens when there are wars? What are the consequences? And those sorts of things, which are inherently more complicated.
Yeah, well, I'd take it back even to that whole idea of the from and to, that when we're clients are coming to us with potential problems that they need solving, the most important thing is to frame that up and say, is that the problem?
Right.
I don't know where to go with that war thing, but maybe that would be the vein. That what's the root cause of that?
Sure.
Peel it back and frame it. Is that really the problem we're trying to solve, or is that just some symptom that we're going to? So it keeps going back to sort of, I think, pattern reading, broad knowledge, critical thinking, and how you can start to a sense of evaluation. And I think my partnership, one of our strengths, I hope, is the internal discourse we have around sort of editing that, and then internal iterations the problem solving is kind of a debate, or I think this, or did you see that, and then you can sort of collaborate internally to frame up the problem.
It seems that when we talk about this tremendous migration in your career, and what you and I think would both agree has been a migration in the landscape of the design, business, communication world, The reason maybe that firms like yours or practices like yours have been able to make that jump more effectively than others, perhaps, is ironically is the presence of graphic design, because graphic design is so tied to communication, and communication is so tied to the idea of getting your story to your customers, to your users, to identity, that it somehow, in many ways, is a more core business, let's say, if I could say, than architecture. Because architecture can be treated, if I'm designing a building for Western, what is now Western University, and I definitely want to talk about the rebranding of higher education, because that's a very interesting topic these days. But if I'm designing a building for Western, it's one thing. It may represent a portion of their enterprise, research science, housing for students, something else. But the graphic design and the logo and everything is something somehow seems to me to communicate at a very core level. It's not, you're not just communicating content, you're communicating feelings.
I kind of twist that a bit and say maybe the core thing is the brand, right? Because the brand is the true story,
right?
And the graphic design, which so many graphic design firms have evolved into branding agencies, and the tools of graphic design are things that create logos and taglines and imagery, but the real problem that I think a lot of people are trying to solve is always forefront is what is our brand and what is our story.
Right.
So brand often kind of gets confused with visual identity, because that's the manifestation of the symbols and the colors and the imagery. But the real thing that people I think are so often grappling with is the idea of brand. What's our story? What's our authentic story?
What's our value proposition?
What's our value proposition? Right. And I'll go all over the map here for a moment and say, how are we different? And now if I can just make a quick sidebar, because I think it's really important, a really important sidebar in brand. If anyone's done any studying of brand or read about brand, and I fell into it myself just 20 minutes ago, talking about brand making you different. Well, the other very important contextual discussion there is not how brands make you different, that's part of it, but it's also how do they make you the same? Because there's a kind of a risk management thing that's so many businesses or institutions or anything is conscious of. You don't want to go and make a brand statement that is just all about being different if that's going to alienate people and just say that's just darn weird. Right. So there's often, I think, a kind of a hidden discourse in branding about how are we the same so that we can lend comfort or assure people that that's a safe decision. So branding is not just about difference, it's often about a knowledge, and this comes back to our discourse about critical thinking. How similar are you, or how different do you wish to be? Right. So then once that discourse around a true story, a true brand, an authentic thing, very often, if you had a question about 25 minutes ago, didn't you? Is going to be manifested in graphic design. You need a symbol, you need some color, you need some great typography, you need taglines, you need, how does the image and type go together? How do you make a PowerPoint? How do you make a video? So it's that currency is very, very useful. People need that. Sure. But the big work is the kind of the brand story, and how do you determine that? How do you make it authentic? And then that sort of twist on it that I just gave is, how do you want to be different, and how do you want to be sort of the same?
How do you want to be different, but not frighten people, but not scare people away?
Yeah, and but some companies, have that kind of, I think, raison d'etre, that they want to be out there and be avant-garde and different, and so a real differentiating proposition is part of it and should be represented in the graphics and everything else. Others, which are in more conservative sectors like finance, or even in schools or in automotive stuff, you can see that there's a real trend towards, well, we're a little different, but we're
not crazy.
We're not crazy, And there was a funny piece, I can't remember where I saw it, where it talked about, this idea of sameness, when there's so many Asian and Chinese car companies, which are, it's really pretty outrageous how they're just taking very well-known Western automotive brands, the symbols and logos,
Right.
and just tweaking them a little bit.
Right.
So they're distinct, but
Right.
they speak much more to the sameness that,
Sure.
that our symbol or logo is
Right.
something that you would represent, you would see, you would feel familiar. Oh, that feels like a Ford or a Volkswagen
Right.
So the sort of sameness thing.
It's co-opting the comfort level that one has.
Co-opting the
with-
comfort level.
Well, this gets to, I think, something that's super interesting, which is, and it's very much going on all the time now.
Yeah.
Anybody who watches television or is on the internet has a solid 50% of our classes at any given moment. You see ads for universities, because in this country anyway, higher education is very much in play.
Yep.
It's being transformed all the time. It's market-driven. It's a huge expense. There's a hope to get a major value. This is not a casual purchase. This is a very important decision.
Yep.
So the role that branding and positioning, so many universities are looking to brand and reposition themselves for various purposes. Western is
Yep.
one.
Yep.
Northeastern has transformed itself utterly
Right.
in the last 15 years.
Right.
And there is an authentic brand that underlies it, which is a top 50 university in the United States.
Right.
There's real substance, to be sure. In addition, the graphic design went from a kind of hipster, sans serif, italicized 70s font.
Right.
You guys don't maybe know this, but it wasn't very many years ago.
Right.
This could have been your RGA, the early RGA
yeah.
logo, and to a much more sedate, traditional crest that suggests
Well, it's
the kind of
J.K.
age.
Rowling's fault with Harry Potter, right?
Harry Potter,
Because everyone wants the Hogwarts tradition crest. What house are you in? And
Yes,
do you
yes,
have
yes.
robes? And there is really a significant impact that people, the desire and the sort of attraction to things traditional and more classical is without a doubt.
Well, but the speed with which that has been occurring is kind of stunning to me.
Right.
But how many of you have seen ads for, let's say, a late night vocational school or a university that didn't exist 30 minutes ago or something like this, advertising, and it has the rhetoric and imagery of something that's been there forever. I'm sorry, what part of England did your 500-year-old
Yes.
university emerge from?
Right.
What great medieval
Yes.
scholarly tradition does it come from?
Right.
Actually, it's a friend of mine working in a New Jersey mall,
Yeah, I was gonna say
and
that,
we got an internet connection, and now we have a university. My point is that the signifiers of these various of meaning
Right.
in the brands. Maybe this is somewhat analogous to the car companies co-opting the sort of safety records and tradition of reliability and so forth.
Right, or German or engineering.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's super interesting because it makes you realize how, both how effective these tools are and how susceptible we are to misreading.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think we are kind of immersed in that in some of our practice now, and the reassurance and credibility, just that you are a real university and that you were founded in preferably the 19th century.
Right,
and if you can
right.
go back further, that's better. And in business schools, and I imagine it's probably the same here. If you have a named business school, their kind of marketing challenge is what a few years ago would have been a pretty credible strategy to say we're the Smith School of Business, but they would sort of strike out on their own with a bold, whatever our ideas are, or our curriculum, or our star faculty, or our sort of themes, or whatever those are. The Smith Business School was quite confident that was the way to sort of strike out independently, and much to the chagrin
of the
overall brand, university brand.
How dare you go off,
Right.
start, setting up your own brand? But we definitely see a trend now where, because I guess of the, anybody can set up a business school in a strip mall in Jersey, that once upon a time those business schools who wanted to set out alone, they are now much more comfortable and much more aware of the need to align themselves with the umbrella of the university, because particularly if they're attracting international students or in terms of a larger profile, that it is the
it's the university brand that will attract more than the discrete, fragmented school or college.
The university gives the credibility, and so there's much more alignment there that you didn't have just a few years ago.
That's so interesting. By the way, my own experience, that rings completely true. We used to branch out in the School of Architecture more on our own than we do now. In other words, we're much more. We see the advantages of having a more thoughtful interrelationship with the larger university brand.
Yeah, well, the Western exercise was really that to nearly an absurd level, that various, like a small engineering exercise, or they got some small grant at the engineering department at Western, and they decided, well, the first thing we're going to do is start our own little letterhead and our own little brand, because we're going to be exploring, the tensile structures of bridges or something, and it's going to be called the Jones Institute.
Right.
Well, the amount of time, money, and effort to try and build a little brand for the Jones Institute, rather than having a much more coordinated and aligned strategy with Western, which has, their significant budget, their years of marketing, their presence, their penetration into the market, is obviously the much wiser decision. All boats will rise, but if you go off and start to form these independent brands and identities, it sort of seems like a good idea at the time, but it's really extremely counterproductive. You can't, you just can't. It's just, really a waste of money.
Right. No, it's.
But that's not to say you shouldn't try and create some balance, that you certainly want your identity within that larger institution, but it's absolutely essential that you think of it. Maybe this is that idea. Think of it from the user point, not of what your own concerns are, but go out there and how is the average potential student shopping or looking for a university? They're not going to have heard of the Jones tensile engineering thing. They're going to want to study engineering at Western, or architecture at Northeastern, or so that is I think that more and more people are aware of that need within university branding to have that kind of cohesion and alignment.
You were talking earlier about some examples of ways in which a client, you alluded to them, about ways that a client thought they knew exactly what they wanted you guys to do, whether it's a pooper scooper or whatever it might be. We know exactly what it is. Could you guys just design it for us?
Right. You're the butler. You're the design butler.
Yeah,
Put it over there, make it bigger.
Right. And now tell us a little bit about, there's a key moment in that conversation. I'm the representative from the company that says we'd like to hire Kerr Smith to design our chair or a pooper scooper or whatever. And you tell me, well, okay, but here's how we like to do this. We want to sort of zoom out and try to make sure we understand what the real problem is, what the real question is you're trying to answer.
Right.
How do clients, they probably respond to that first broadening in a variety of ways.
Right.
Give us a sense of
Well,
how
I think I'll go back to the larger methodology and the process, which is a word that gets thrown around in our studio a lot, and I'm sure most of the students here are aware of that word, engagement. So if you are kind of unilaterally making these decisions, or in a small group saying, this is our insight, you're just not going to get traction. What is just absolutely essential is that you're talking to that wide variety of stakeholders, and let's go back into the university world. Have you talked to the students? Have you talked to the alumni? Have you talked to faculty? Have you talked to staff?
Have you talked to the local community? Have you talked to, any government representative?
Right.
And when you've started to compile these series, let's call them, of sort of mini insights,
Right.
is when that constant dialogue with the client has to, so it can't be sort of like some sort of summit. Oh my God, we've come up with this insight.
A different problem than you thought you had.
Exactly. It has got to be a constant dialogue where you say, well, it's interesting. We talked to Frank and Paul,
Right.
and their take on it was that it's not really about innovation. They
Right.
wanted something completely different.
Right.
And that's interesting because when we had that little workshop with those, with that incubator lab over there looking at you, they kind of said the same thing.
Right, right.
All of that to say that it's not black and white and it's not simple, but the methodology, the need to engage, the need to have that ongoing dialogue so that it's highly collaborative is essential.
So you get me as I'm imagining I'm the hard-nosed, I don't know, head of this company that wants you just to design this thing.
Right.
And the way you start to break through to me is simply by asking some questions like, I see, so this is for such and such a user. Now, have you thought about, are there any other market segments that you might be thinking
Exactly.
about? So that you're not challenging you're not challenging my
It's a conversation.
request.
If you're
Yeah.
circling it back and you're sort of saying, well, what about this? I mean, to be perfectly honest, sometimes you're not going to convert. They just want,
Right.
they're not.
They wanted the thing and they want it yesterday, and
yes,
can you do it?
Yes, and then they do have a very narrow vision of it, and that's a viable business model for a design studio to do. Say, okay, I'm going to build websites.
We're going to execute excellent
We're going to
things.
do a signage system or whatever.
Right, right.
And so I don't think I don't think I can sort of say exactly how that works every time. It really is in a kind of case-for-case situation, how open-minded they are. I did some consulting work for a school that really very much so about this is the project and this is the solution, which was we need a sign on the building. But I kept backing up from there and saying, well, let's just talk about this in a larger way.
Right, right.
Is it a sign on...
Why do you need a sign?
Why do you... Well, I mean, but it's not just the main sign on the building. How do you approach it from different angles? And how, if you're coming from this unlikely, back alley, or if you're driving along, or and. So you try and sort of back it up and say, look at all of these component parts. And then, I'm sure if there are any architects in the room and have done architectural signage, that what also becomes inextricably linked with signage is donor recognition. Because so what was once sort of articulated as, well, we're just trying to identify the building, all of a sudden, when you kind of peel it back or pan back from it, it might actually be a fundraising issue,
Right.
and that you're trying to recognize an important donor in a way that they will be happy to be recognized.
Right.
And to make it further complex is that there may be all sorts of backflips to make that particular donor happy, but what you're actually, if you make that donor happy,
Right.
and you've got a system, presumably that means other donors will say, oh, they treated John so well. I love the way they did that sign or that wall or that
Right.
garden or those benches or whatever. I'm going to be part of that as well. Like I want to join up because they treat donors well. So,
Right.
there's an example of a project that was about a sign on a building that actually became, let's think about the strategy for recognizing donors, which backs up into a whole kind of fundraising approach to fundraising.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about, you talked about most of the themes that we've touched on in this course very well, which I'm not surprised at, since based on our conversation before.
No, it was quite, yeah, I
there's
kind of came in thinking, well, this is where we are, and that conversation was remarkably in sync with
Yeah.
what we're doing and the way the landscape of, I guess, the traditional landscape of what a designer is assumed, their role and their sort of problem-solving methodology, and how much it is so drastically changed, and it's very exciting. But it's very, very, it's dynamic, it's fast, and it's challenging as well.
Yeah. Well, we had a really great guy, Jordan Goldstein, who's the managing partner of Gensler in Washington, D.C.
Yep.
here, and talking about nothing but interdisciplinary teams to answer these kinds of strategic questions.
Well, I believe, that last phase of my presentation here about foresight, I know Gensler is very aware of, if you know in healthcare or in education or in some certain sector, there's certain trends that are the distant signals. How is that going to impact on how you're going to design a space?
Right. Well, that's the thing for the engineers in here, for the healthcare students, for the business students. The idea that this is the flavor that strategic consulting takes now. That it is not as disciplinarily specific as it once was. There's much more in the way of interdisciplinary teams.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the way our business school at this university is organized is different than every other college on the campus, on that's part of our university. It doesn't have departments. Therefore, it doesn't have department chairs. It doesn't have fixed disciplinary identities where, oh my gosh, if they no longer call my department by the name that I'm familiar with, I'm nobody, which is the way a faculty member might look at that. Instead, they have what they call groups, and everybody has tenure within the College of Business. In other words, they don't have tenure within a subset. So the groups, which might sound like departments, are actually not, because they're super malleable.
Right.
What is marketing today might turn out to be, I don't know, the positioning unit in 5 years.
Well, that goes back to the question. One of the questions we chatted about a few minutes ago was it is a massive challenge to have that broad a level of curiosity and knowledge in many different sectors. It really is the kind of cross-pollination and the need to adapt and think about outlier issues that you wouldn't have thought, well, that kind of discipline or fact or area doesn't really affect. Well, chances are, because of the kind of mash-up world of contemporary business and culture and communication, it is quite possible that something that would have been a very marginal or outlier issue becomes much more fundamental to your problem solving or your business model.
Well, when we start trying to bring the kind of systems thinking that you were talking about, and by the way, I don't think I know any company that goes, maybe Gensler does with some of its healthcare products, because they actually make some furniture products. But for a modestly sized company, that you guys go from conceptualizing the flatware to designing it, to prototyping it, to executing it, to marketing it, to packaging it, it's really a soup to nuts operation in some of those products, it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the things that were kind of interesting was at the real end of all of that was when we were doing a kind of a green, sustainable initiative. It became not about just the materials of what we were going to use, recycled cardboard and less plastics and less packing and stuff, but how many of the boxes you could get onto a pallet
right.
that could then be put into a shipping container.
Sure.
And then you're talking about shipping costs and the price of sort of diesel oil to get the tanker across the Pacific. So the logistics of it become part of the kind of environmental imperative, not just what the flatware looks like, or that it's a lovely green box that says it's recycled. You're really taking it into a larger system of as I say, from not just marketing but into the shipping, logistics, and.
I'm going to ask the students if they have any questions here in just a second, but before I do, I think it's important to point out that this systems thinking that we're talking about here is something that is really coming to universities, whether we like it or not. And what I mean by that is we are going to have to go through some structural and organizational changes at universities to accommodate the change in disciplines, in what we teach, how we teach it, that are coming. In other words, the idea that I mean, it's interesting. One of the things we like about universities is that they have been around for a long time. They're a proven commodity. They're not a fly-by-night operation. Right. So-and-so's grandfather went to school here. He or she did well. It's a key to our future, et cetera. So you have that on the one hand. That's part of the brand or the identity, if you will. Right. But on the other hand is the need to remain relevant in a changing environment, and so that the idea that all departments will remain the same, the idea that all faculty appointments will remain the same, the idea that all student profiles will remain the same seems to be completely not the case.
Well, I don't know where you find that balance between, of course, the university has to provide an environment for a kind of a shelter or protection so you can do research, so you can really stretch and you can risk stuff.
Yep.
But, where, I don't know what the word is, the porosity or how you measure or balance that with just relevance, that you're not just up the old ivory tower doing, that you're not oblivious to the massive sea change, the speed of change,
it's completely true.
Yeah, I just to exaggerate, the violence of it sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're getting into, kind of retail branding or houseware stuff, it is like a Shark Tank, right? How fast people will steal. I don't know if you've heard of, in Asian factories, the 3 shifts, right? There's the day shift, there's the night shift, and then there's the third shift where the products come out where you're not quite sure how and where that are based on somebody else's design. I mean, it is highly, highly competitive. There's lots of unethical stuff out there. It is fast and furious in many, many ways. And I'm not in any way implying that, all business is like that, but once you've been exposed to it, and I'm not implying that universities are playing like that, but, as a sort of an exaggeration of how competitive it is it's important to be aware how fast the world's changing and how many innovative things or novelty things that kind of blur the lines around good problem solving and legitimate even design practice. It's really fast and furious.
I think the big change might be that universities have long thought of themselves as a shoreline or a bulwark against those roiling seas, and now we have only come recently to know that we are indeed just a big ship that is in those seas. We're not likely to sink, but it doesn't mean that we are going to stay in the same place. Do we have any questions from the audience today? Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Nigel, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.